Good evening. So I'm going to present some notes on public memory and process through my current work, American Monument, that takes a look at state violence and police brutality. And I'll be playing some clips from the project, and because they contain traumatic content, I just want to give folks the heads up to take care of yourselves and leave if you need be.
You are too much of a pussy to shoot me. You are too much of a pussy to shoot me. You are too much of a pussy to shoot me. You are too much of a pussy to shoot me. You are too much of a pussy to shoot me. You are too much of a pussy to shoot me.
So these are the last words that Darren Wilson, a police officer, claimed that an 18-year-old black teenager declared when the two were tussling and after the officer unholstered his gun. Words claimed to have been uttered while the white cop who killed Michael Brown attempted to pull the teenager by his arm and his shirt into his SUV. These were the last words that Darren Wilson, who today lives in a house paid for in cash from a GoFundMe campaign, claimed that Michael Brown declared right before he pumped at least a half a dozen bullets into his body. One of the many results of the movement for Black Lives was a new level of exposure to police brutality and access to formal investigations. In an effort to perform transparency, municipalities and federal agencies dumped public records into the public sphere through the internet. In 2014, I started wading through the sea of police records and court transcriptions and nationally discussed cases. What caught my attention was how the use of language shaped perception and perhaps the outcome of these cases. I also began to notice this pattern of what I call unblack utterances that appear in these narrative constructions. These are claims of oral aggression from victims when there's no video documentation to corroborate. These utterances are often asserted to bolster the claims of police officers, citing they fear for their lives. Like the conversation with my friends, my family, my colleagues, intellectual soulmates, people in my community were that these utterances just didn't sound typical of black speech. They were unblack. More specifically, as in the claims of Darren Wilson, the use of pussy and too much of just didn't syntactically make any sense. As an experiment, I invited black men, poets, rappers, actors, musicians, artists, friends, cousins, to 3-hour studio sessions with me where I would record them saying these phrases in repetition. The task was to embody the phrase and make it sound believable, pausing the record only to process the many emotions that came up when contemplating black life and black death in this country. In all recordings, at some point in this process, the participant would shift from trying to genuinely embody the phrase to performing the utterance according to some kind of pop cultural rendering of blackness. For instance, in one session, a participant literally wondered out loud to himself, how would Denzel say this in Training Day? And just like that, he said it, and it was believable. So to be clear, this black man had to go to a Hollywood character to embody the words that a white man claimed a black teenager said. How radically different these claims of behavior were compared to the cases where there was actual documentation of the murder. In body and dash cams, we hear voices of victims and the uncanny ability to be superhuman when faced with imminent death. We hear the exhaustion of being subjected to relentless police profiling. We hear the natural human impulse to resist being treated inhumanely. And we hear unnatural discipline to defer to someone trying to divest another of their humanity. And lastly, we hear the pleading of someone. We've heard the pleading that someone, anyone, recognize the human being standing in front of them.
Stop. What I did? I'm saying what I did, son. Don't fucking move on. Shoot your fucking ass, bitch. Put your fucking hands on the car. Put your hands on the car. I'm gonna shoot you in your fucking head. You understand me? Don't you fucking move. I'm gonna shoot you in your fucking head. You hear me? Don't you fucking move. All right, hold up, man. You hurt my arm. Stop. I'm saying what happened, man. Hold on, my hands is on the car. Tase his ass. You on the ground. Get on the ground! Pop him again, Howie. Hey, bro, get on the fucking ground. What the fuck? Hold on. What the fuck?
Use copy shots fired, no Boston. 2100, no Boston.
Hey! Hold on, no, stop! Everybody stop!
What's the fast is? How we almost there.
Stupid motherfucker!
And so, public records become just one more way to trace the mechanisms by which whiteness produces this phenomenon called the quote-unquote black body, and how ideas of blackness formed in the white imaginary manifest into material violence against actual black people. I believe African-American studies scholar and Afro-pessimist Frank Wilderson when he says, "You better understand white people's fantasies, because tomorrow they will be legislation. That is what the law is. The law is white fantasy as objective value." And so, my current work grew out of an impulse to assemble more records of police brutality for study. It was out of a desperate need to have a deeper, more concrete understanding of these issues past the spectacle of the news cycle and social media feeds. American Monument is a work that actively transforms existing architecture in a city into an intermediate monument, examining constructed race, material violence, structural power, as well as the cultural circumstances under which Black people have lost and are still losing their lives to police violence. A tool with research, pedagogical, and activist functions, it is process-based, participatory, networked, and designed to be nomadic, and continually expanding, moving across the country year to year, unveiled at sites such as universities, museums, storefronts, community centers, and churches. The centerpiece of this interactive sound sculpture is a grid of silently spinning acetate records on black and white turntables that utilize primary source material from Freedom of Information Act requests. Each turntable represents one police murder. The grid is to grow in scale as the monument moves from host site to another, as more records are made to document the ceaseless violence. Supporting the main sculpture, reflection spaces ponder the law as culture. Each case represented in the grid, associated with an aluminum box, contains documents that are able to procure from request. American Monument is a monument that warns. It is not a memorial to or about victims, per se. It wants to do more than just represent this issue. It aims to contribute to the movement to end police brutality, and so with each monument mounting, local think tanks invite scholars, lawyers, community activists, civil rights leaders, students, and artists, and the general public to engage in political education. The thought production from these think tanks help to build out the additional informational spaces doing the translational work between specialized fields and the larger public. At the end of the public production process that collaboratively builds this monument, it is unveiled to signal the completion of the iteration. I have been working in collaboration with some brilliant women that form the core project team. The curator and architect, Kimberly Meyer, artist and cultural organizer, Carol Zoe, policy analyst, activist, and co-founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality, Sarah Mercuria. As we develop networks and frameworks for the life of this project, the intention of service is kept at the center. And I know I have 46 seconds, and I don't want to be played off the stage by American black jazz while I'm talking about this, but I just want to quickly say, some of you perhaps heard of the conflict when we tried to initiate the first iteration at Cal State Long Beach last year. Too many details to get into, I invite you to look it up, but we were able to relaunch this year at the Bill Center for Art and Architecture at the University of California in Irvine, where we're in a deep process of research and collaboration with many amazing scholars at the School of Law, Social Ecology, Criminology, Art History, Informatics, just to name a few. And so I know we've all convened this weekend to deeply engage and weigh this idea of speaking truth to power. My impulse is to say that American Monument doesn't do any of these things. As Noam Chomsky says, power knows the truth already, and it's busy concealing it. It is the oppressed who need to hear the truth and not the oppressors. It is our skill set as cultural workers to do this sort of translational work, because we possess the tools to speak to each other in ways that are felt and heard. Speaking truth to power is a means, not an end. The transformative process propelled by the defense of our humanity and refusal to be stifled. Thank you.